Uri Geller. We all think we know everything about him. After all, he's been on our television screens for more than 40 years, performing his little miracles. Bending spoons, bending forks, bending keys, and seeing things at a distance and drawing them with sometimes uncanny accuracy. Today, 40 years since his first TV appearances, Uri lives in a palatial home on the banks of the River Thames, and he's still working on entertaining us. His garden is like a map of his mind, full of New Age wonders.
Where do I start? That lantern is from Mount Fuji. John Lennon, we were good friends. He said, find spirituality. And Yoko says, go to Japan. And I went to Japan. Let's go through the Toro Gate. The Japanese legend says that if you go through a Toro Gate, you enter spiritual realms. Shall we do that? Imagine we are in spiritual realms now. And this is what John gave me. I mean, he claimed that he got it from an alien. An alien hand stretched out and dropped this into the palm of his hand in the Dakota building. And he gave it to me. And I carry it everywhere I go. It's heavy. It's unexplainable. And I get thousands of emails from people asking me, Uri, did you have it tested? Give it to scientists. It could be something really from another planet. And you know what I say? I don't want to test it. I don't want to find out that it's made in Taiwan.
Well, that's Uri Geller through and through. Yet there are tantalizing clues that suggest there's more to him than meets the eye. Supposing his public career as a famous and sometimes notorious entertainer has all just been a front. For years, he's let drop hints about something far more cloak and dagger. Secret work as a psychic spy for military and intelligence agencies in the Americas, Britain, and also for Israel's legendary secret intelligence agency, the Mossad. Perhaps that explains the extraordinary security measures installed all over his estate.
If I may, let me tell you how it started in me, in Uri Geller. I always had this James Bondy mind, you know. I was a great storyteller in school. I could fantasize and imagine things, and I would kind of utter them out and create a story about everything. And I would tell stories in front of my class and so on. So when my parents divorced, my mother fell in love with a Hungarian Jew that lived in Cyprus, in Nicosia. And he had a bed and breakfast little motel or establishment. We had 12 rooms which he would rent out. We're talking about 1960, 61. And one day I befriended a guy called Yoav Shacham, who stayed in our little hotel. Yoav saw me bend a spoon and a key, and I did telepathy with him. And I told him one day, Yoav, I can read your mind, and I know that you're an Israeli spy, aren't you? And then he said, Uri, when you grow up and you have to join the Israeli army, I want you to go to the paratroopers. Then go to officers' school, and I'll help you. I'll get you into the Mossad, because your capabilities, your abilities are incredible, and we need them. So you can imagine, you tell this to a 13-year-old, 14-year-old kid, I'm over the moon. Wow, I'm going to be the greatest spy in the world. I'll work for the Mossad, and I'll read minds, and I'll bend gun barrels. To make a long story short, 18, 19, I go back to Israel, I join the paratroopers, jump out of planes, I do my stuff, and then I go to officers' school. I do exactly what Yoav told me. But you know that when I was in the paratroopers and the Six-Day War started, my unit, we were sent to Ramallah in Jerusalem. We were under tremendous attack by the Jordanian Patton tanks, and some Israeli jets threw napalm bombs, and some didn't hit the right target. And it was a mess, and suddenly from behind a rock, a Jordanian soldier jumps out, holding a weapon, and he was about to shoot me. And I was holding my Uzi. And I looked him in the eye, Vikram, and he looked into my eye, and it was like time froze. And then suddenly my whole life played like a movie in a flash, in a split second in my mind. And I snapped out of it, luckily, because I realized that whoever is going to press the trigger first will survive. And I was faster than him, and I shot him. Killed him. Soon after that, I was wounded in my 2 arms, and I woke up in Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. And only then it dawned on me what I've committed. And the ideological power in you, the love for Israel, for the Jewish nation worldwide, was embedded in me even deeper because of that war.
So, at 20 years old, with the Six-Day War over and won, Uri Geller knew 3 things. He was deeply committed to the cause of Israel, he wanted to become a spy for the Mossad, and he had some pretty extraordinary paranormal powers. He began making his living using these paranormal powers, playing Tel Aviv nightclubs, and made home movies of everything that he did. We've been able to draw on his personal archive in making this film. As Uri became more famous all over Israel, he also began his lifelong pattern of making friends with influential people.
Well, we were both very, very young. Maybe going back almost 40 years. I was in a special unit in the army, and Uri came to entertain us. At the time, there was a song in Israel, a popular song about how the bananas come out in this shape. And they said that there's a secret man who comes at night and he bends the bananas. And I remember that we met the secret man who bent the bananas. Well, he didn't bend bananas, he bent spoons. And he did these amazing things. And I remember it made a tremendous impression on me when I was a young soldier. And that's how we first met, and then we met again and again and again. And each time, I was amazed more. I'm still amazed. I haven't the faintest idea how he does these things.
Very early in my career, I was taken to a place called Midrasha. It's just out of Tel Aviv, in Herzliya. It's on a hill, and it's top secret, you know, cameras everywhere, and barbed wire. They were all Mossad and Secret Service agents and generals and spies and you name it. And I was taken there to give a big lecture, and I think I blew their minds. I moved the hands of a watch. I did mind reading. I instilled pictures in other people's minds. I did things that they could grab and twist and use for their own missions. So for me to get to work for the Mossad later on, which I can't talk about what I did, but I dealt with all, you know, the oldies there, people like Moshe Dayan, a couple of generals, the head of Mossad, and Aharon Yariv. He asked me if I can do certain things and which I answered to some yes, to some no, and then to the ones that I said yes, he arranged me to execute those requests, and those I cannot talk about. It was just an interesting situation because I believe that that performance was watched by a scientist called Yitzhak Bentov, who wrote back a letter to an American scientist saying that he's just seen this young guy called Uri Geller who does these most amazing things of bending spoons and forks and reading minds, and somehow that started it. The Americans at that time were worried about Nina Kulagina moving things on the table and matches and bell jars, and they were worried. Hey, the Russians have these amazing psychics that can do these things. Why don't we have somebody? And that's how it all started. That letter got to the desk of one of the high, officers in the CIA, and that was then they said, when they all knew that the Russians were ahead of the Americans in psychical research, and probably one of the heads of the CIA said, "Get this guy, bring him to America."
The very senior CIA officer who handled Uri Geller's case was Dr. Kit Green.
One afternoon, I got a telephone call on my desk in the headquarters building. And the phone call initially was on what we call the red line. It was a classified line. It was an intelligence agency of a very powerful ally of the United States of America. And they were troubled because a member of their military, an enlisted man, who was doing things for them that they couldn't understand, that appeared to have an electromagnetic aspect, that he was capable of altering highly sophisticated electronics, which included imaging electronics, at will. And they didn't know how he was doing it. At the time, I had a position of leadership in the division that was responsible for life sciences, biological and chemical warfare. So I got the first call, and the question was simply, "Can you help us?" And my response initially was, "Of course, I'll be glad to try."
And so it was that Uri came to America in 1972. Landing at Washington, D.C., he made his way out to the Stanford Research Institute near Palo Alto, California. The Stanford Research Institute has always been at the cutting edge of emerging technologies. Sometimes SRI's research is a bit speculative, but it's always serious science, even when studying the paranormal.
I'm Hal Putoff. I got my PhD at Stanford University and then went to Stanford Research Institute. Basically, my work was primarily in lasers and quantum electronics. So I did many years, published many papers and a textbook and so on in the physical sciences and lasers and quantum electronics.
And yet, you haven't been scared in your lifelong career of looking at things that kind term would be are at the sort of periphery of classic science.
That's true, but to a physicist, if it moves, it's physics. And so if there's an observable, and that's what at some point in my career I was exposed to, and I said, okay, here's something that apparently occurs, so there must be some physics here. So let's take a look at it. I'd never bought an ESP journal or never subscribed to Fate magazine. No, I wasn't interested at all. In fact, as it turns out, the only reason I got involved in this was that I was interested in what we now call quantum entanglement.
In 1972, when Hal and I started the program at SRI, we had already, in our previous incarnation as laser physicists, we had both done hardware research for the CIA. We had built things. I had built a laser listening device, which I don't think I'll go into right now, but I'd used a laser to get information from distant places. So I knew people in the CIA, and Hal did also from his early experience in naval intelligence. And in the early 70s, we had done research with a retired police commissioner, Pat Price.
Pat Price caught their interest because he seemed to have astonishing powers of seeing things taking place a long way away. Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff called this psychic talent remote viewing.
And we did a series of experiments where once a week, Hal would be taken off somewhere to a random location. Price and I would sit in the laboratory and we would work together. He would be the psychic and I would be the psychic travel agent to try and help him describe where Hal was hiding.
These are the first words the man said.
I'm seeing boat dock, boat jetty. That's definitely a boat dock or a jetty.
And we did 9 trials like that. 7 out of those 9 were matched first place, which is to say if Hal had been kidnapped by terrorists 9 days in a row, we would have found him the first place we looked in 7 out of those 9 times.
These experiments seem to establish that psychics might be able to find hidden people or objects at a distance. SRI's investigation of Uri Geller was initially all about testing his electromagnetics, nothing to do with psychic remote viewing. But his arrival at SRI soon changed the entire dynamic for Targ and Puthoff and the CIA supervisor monitoring their secret research contract, Kit Green.
In a very short period of time, a week or 10 days, I got a phone call at headquarters. It was the chief scientist of the laboratory at Stanford Research Institute, and he was talking about other aspects of Uri Geller's capabilities. And I, of course, said, well, what other kinds of things are you talking about? And without much of a pause, the scientist said, well, he says he can see things at a distance. And I said, no, he can't. And they said, yes, he can. I said, no, he can't. And they said, well, he's right here. Say hi to Uri Geller. I said, hi, Uri. And a voice in the background said, hi, Kit. And I said, well, what can you see?
Now, this wasn't on Skype, was it?
No. I was on a telephone, a black. I mean, this is early 70s, before Skype and before cell phones and all that.
He said, okay, I'm sitting at my desk at CIA at Langley, Virginia. I will put something on my desk and let's see if Uri can get it.
I turned, just as I will do now, and I picked up a book, which is the same book that I had on my desk at the time of this phone call many, many years ago. This book is a collection of medical illustrations of the nervous system. And I had it on my desk at the headquarters building because I was using it for part of my work. And I opened it up to a page and I just stared at it. And he said, well, seeing something kind of strange.
So he sat there and he scribbled on paper and crumpled up and threw it away, scribbled some more, threw it away. Finally scribbled something down and says, well, I don't know what to think. It looks like I have made a drawing of a pan of scrambled eggs. And yet I have the word architecture coming in strong. So what he handed us was a sheet of paper that had this scrambled eggs look and the word architecture written across the top.
I later got a copy of that drawing, and I was astonished to find that what he had drawn maybe does look like scrambled eggs, but it was a cross-section of the human brain, a sagittal section from the side of the human brain. But the thing that caught my attention was he had written across the top of his drawing the word architecture. Architecture, I had written in my handwriting the word architecture of viral infection. I was looking at the biological warfare effect on the nervous system of a threat virus. And I'd written on my notes, book, architecture of a viral infection.
We then, or he then, they did tremendous analysis to see is there any chance that there were any cues over the telephone lines and so on. That was a genuine result. And there were others like that we did that we've never published, but certainly convinced us that he has ability.
Why didn't you publish things like that? Is it because that wasn't replicable?
Well, at the time, it was just kind of a one-off thing, but it was primarily because of direct CIA involvement, and that couldn't be admitted till 1995.
So what did you do next?
Well, I went and authorized the expenditure of sufficient funds to ask the people doing the research to expand the experimentation under the construct of remote viewing.
This film describes a 5-week investigation conducted at Stanford Research Institute with Uri Geller. 15 drawings were placed in double-sealed envelopes in a safe for which none of the experimenters had the combination. This is Geller's representation of what he believed was sealed in the envelope. At no time during these experiments did he have any advanced knowledge of the target material. In fact, this is the most off-target of the drawings that he did. Here, the experiment is repeated, this time with Puthoff as a sender, just to check that the identity of the sender is of no significance in the experiment. This is the drawing that Geller has made to correspond to the target object. The rectangle on the clipboard represents the TV screen in Geller's mind on which he claims to project the image he is trying to draw. As you can see, he is quite elated about getting the right answer. Here in the laboratory notebook, on the left side of the page, you see the original targets, and on the right, Geller's responses. This is not a collection of correct answers out of a long series of correct and incorrect responses. This is actually the total run of pictures in a series. It is interesting that there is often a mirror symmetry. This type of communication experiment was repeated many other times during the 5 weeks, with Geller choosing to pass about 20% of the time. In this particular case, the target is a 3/4-inch steel ball. Geller's task now is to determine which of these 10 cans holds the steel ball bearing. The experimental protocol is for the experimenter to remove the cans one at a time in response to Geller's instructions as he points or calls out a can top number. He has made his choice. The steel ball is found. On the other 12 targets, he did make a guess and was correct in every instance. The whole array of this run had an a priori probability of 1,000,000,000 to 1. Here's another double-blind experiment in which a die is placed in a metal box. This is a live experiment that you see. The box is shaken up. In this case, Geller guessed that a 4 was showing. You will note that he was correct, and he was quite pleased to have guessed correctly. Out of 10 tries in which he passed twice and guessed 8 times, the 8 guesses were correct, and that gave us a probability of about 1 in 1,000,000. We would point out again there were no errors in the times he made a guess.
Now, behind the scenes, of course, we were approached by Israeli intelligence, and they had been working with Geller in Israel, but they had only been doing operational things. They had not had any chance to do anything scientific, and so they asked us if we would be willing to, share with them whatever we found out in a scientific venue. Well, that wasn't my call, so that was up to the CIA if they wanted to do that. But
now, Hal Puthoff said that Israeli intelligence officers came to visit him, asking if he would provide them the same information he was providing CIA. Are you aware of this? That's definitely what Hal said.
Yeah, I have to just think how to say what I will say. I am aware that my work there at SRI and other places was constantly monitored by Israeli sources. I'm aware of that. I'm also aware of a rumor that said that while I was at SRI, the CIA suspected that I was acting as a double agent.
Our CIA contract monitor was concerned, as we were maybe this guy is not really psychic or whatever. Maybe it's just Israeli intelligence has them all biologically implemented with who knows what devices, and maybe there are all kinds of efforts going on behind the scenes with secret microphones and secret pickups and so on to try to make him look like he was psychic in order to scare the potential enemies over there that there was this magical guy. Truth of the matter is, we were very worried about that. And I mean, every night when the end of the day came, we would be tearing out the tiles in the laboratory to see if there were hidden microphones and all kinds of things.
What we've demonstrated here are the experiments that we performed in the laboratory. This film gives us the opportunity to share with the viewer observations of phenomena that, in our estimation, clearly deserve further study.
Did you report on your work with Geller to the CIA?
We sent a formal report to the CIA with the Geller data in it. I might even have a copy of such a report here that I could show you. Perhaps I won't do that. I can say, yes, we did. We did report to the CIA in a formal SRI report.
So it started with pretty small funding as a small thing?
Yeah, I think my first project was $56K.
And how much?
$56,000.
How much do you think it all added up to over the years?
Over the years, maybe $20 million or so. I mean, we ended up having several dozen remote viewers, large catch of people.
We were supported by the CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, Army Intelligence, NASA, and you see, I'm able to tell you that only because the program has been declassified, or I'd have to kill you all as soon as I announced who is paying for the program.
So SRI's remote viewing program expanded to training dozens of remote viewers while spreading across many government agencies. Meanwhile, Uri Geller took a different path. With the SRI findings as his calling card, he took his show on the road as a psychic entertainer, and in New York, his first American talk show appearances made him instantly famous across the U.S.
The Stanford Research Institute came up with an almost unanimous opinion that he was legitimate. Uri Geller.
Then Uri moved to London, where his very first British television performance caused a sensation.
Ladies and gentlemen, Uri Geller.
I don't want to waste a lot of time on it. It could be a boat, a ship.
Geller seemed to be demonstrating extraordinary paranormal powers.
It's very...
And overnight, became headline news. Britain was entranced by the psychic performer, and he joined the ranks of the superstars of the day. And now the world came calling. Especially Mexico, where Uri's secret life took yet another extraordinary turn.
After the David Dimbleby show in England for the BBC, It went worldwide. Everybody around the world wanted to witness that happening, so I was invited, and Mexico was one of the channels.
Uri Geller. ¿Quiere que la cámara vea eso en close-up?
All right. The human aura.
Esa es el aura humana.
This is the person.
Esta es la persona.
And look how many levels of aura a person has.
¿Cuántos niveles de aura?
And the wife of President-elect López Portillo, Munsi, was watching me because she was into these, the stuff of the mind. And she just fell in love with what I did. So she ordered her guards to bring me to her house, and that's how it all started. She was amazed. She introduced me to her husband, and that, opened up so many doors. I mean, gosh, and that's why I was in Mexico, and that's where the CIA contacted me, clearly for the first time.
Tell me about that.
I got a call from a guy called Mike, and he said, "We know what you did at Stanford Research Institute. I've seen the reports, and can you help us? Can you do certain things with the power of the mind?" And they gave me a few tasks, like, for instance, to spy on the Russian embassy in Mexico City. It was the largest spying center in Latin America for the KGB. Mike explained me that every 10 or 15 days, I can't quite remember, there is a diplomatic pouch that goes out of the Russian embassy with secret stuff in it. And there are floppy disks inside, whether I could erase them. And I said, yeah, I can erase floppy disks. Whenever the information went out, they were always in diplomatic pouches, chained with a handcuff to the wrist of one of the KGB agents. The flight would go to Paris, and then they would get off the plane and take another to Moscow. I would sit behind them, and I would think, erase, erase, erase. This was, for me, I was living James Bond. I was living the movies. It was fantastic feeling that, wow, I was doing something for the CIA.
Now, how did word get back to you that it had worked?
Because they asked for more.
It's unlikely that CIA will ever confirm Ori's story. Either way, he stayed close to Mexico's president and his wife Munsi, especially Munsi, in the capacity of a sort of psychic bodyguard. But he sometimes wondered just how he'd gotten into this and whether it was really just good luck.
I always, even to this day, I suspect that this gig was arranged by higher forces. And there I was, instilled into the president-elect, López Portillo and his wife. Who knows, maybe even the invitation to go to Mexico by Mexica's Televisa channel. Who knows who pulled the strings there? I must have been followed to Mexico. I was injected into Mexico, and then things started kind of moving around.
So what was he doing being an undercover agent in Mexico? Did he ever tell you the story?
Uri Geller worked for the Mexican government in an undercover capacity. And if he'd be at a, say, President of Mexico event, and he sensed through his, for lack of a better word, powers, that there was a danger present in one or two people, he would bring it to their attention, and they would see that person wouldn't have any access to the president.
I was a federal agent for the Mexico Treasury at that time. The president made me a Mexican agent, and I've done quite a lot of stuff for the Mexicans too, having that credential, and it opened a lot of doors.
They gave him a beautifully engraved .45 caliber revolver, automatic, not a revolver, automatic. And he brought it in next time he came into New York on a plane, and it was stopped by customs. They took it away from him. You can't bring guns in, particularly New York is pretty strong in that area. So Uri called the Mexican authorities that he knew. They called the U.S. authorities.
So the law then said that a federal agent of another country can carry a weapon into another country, and they had a treaty with America. But for some reason they took the gun away, and Charlie came and returned it, and that's where I met him.
My boss, for lack of a better word, special agent in charge, said, Costco was down there with the Mexicans. Have him go up and find out what this guy's complaint is, because we're getting heat through State Department. So I got the gun back and gave it to him. And that's how I first met him.
Did he have a badge as well?
He had an engraved credentials, unlike mine. I can show you what mine looked like. His was engraved, very nicely done, yes. I would never ask Uri how he got that work or whatnot and how long he did it, but that's how I met Uri Geller on 57th Street in New York City for the first time and got him back his gun.
There's a man who lives a life of danger, and everyone he meets, he stays a stranger. Yet every move he makes, another chance he takes. Odds are he won't live to see tomorrow. Secret agent man, secret agent man.
Now that Uri was back living full-time in New York, he seems to have been able to keep up his undercover work. For instance, it seems that he was maintaining some pretty serious links with the powers that be in Israel. Uri's friend Byron Janis is one of the world's most celebrated pianists, seen here being honored by President Reagan. He is married to Gary Cooper's daughter, Maria, which explains the 3 Oscars in the house. And they are major supporters of Israel. Byron and Maria caught several glimpses of Uri's secret life.
Do you know much about that?
Oh, I know a little about it, yeah.
Some,
yes. Because we had experiences with Mossad. Once, as a matter of fact, we had Ariel Sharon here, so he could talk to him a lot about Israel, and that we know that there was a strong connection.
And to meet in a private home, to all intents and purposes, it never happened, but...
And they were obviously prepping him for something, that kind of thing.
If that's really the case, maybe they called on Uri when Palestinian hijackers burst into the news on July 4th, 1976. They took over an Air France plane full of Israelis and flew it down to Entebbe Airport in Idi Amin's Uganda. They began getting ready to kill their hostages, one by one.
Entebbe. You were in some way involved on the raid on Entebbe. Could you tell me something about that? What was it about?
I can tell you this. Just imagine that I have a zipper on my lips here, and I just zip my lips. I can't talk about that. Whatever you heard from other people, you heard. I will not confirm nor deny, and that's all I can tell you.
In a daring commando raid, Israeli forces flew 2,000 miles and stormed Entebbe Airport at the very last moment and freed all the hostages. The raid's thrilling success astonished the world, especially as Israeli planes had somehow crossed Egyptian airspace undetected.
What do you think is out there that people are saying about you in Entebbe?
What I read and hear is that I knocked out the radar systems all the way through to Entebbe when the raid took place, in which Benjamin Netanyahu's brother was killed. And that's how Israeli airplanes got safely into Entebbe. That's what I hear.
The main problem was to get to the terrorists with the biggest surprise possible. We used several tricks to do that. And once it worked, all the rest was quite simple.
It was 1 week, almost to the minute after they'd taken off on their ill-fated flight to Paris, that the crew and remaining passengers landed back on Israeli soil. It was, coincidentally, at the exact hour at which the hijackers' ultimatum to the Israeli government was due to run out, and the hostages had been warned by their captors that they would die.
You see, you've got a major problem with me and the story of Uri Geller is because those certain important, secret, confidential, top secret things that I've done cannot be told. Now, if others say them, that's fine, it's not me saying. So if you've got a scientist saying, oh, Uri did knock out the radar systems for the planes to be allowed to fly without being detected into Entebbe, by knocking out the radar systems, if someone else says it, then someone else says it. You will not hear that from me. Just think, use your imagination. Wouldn't I have been asked to do certain things of this nature? Of course.
As Uri says, secrets have to stay secret, unless they get declassified later on down the line, like the Stanford Research Institute's work with Uri for the CIA eventually was. But could radar systems conceivably be knocked out by paranormal powers? Well, psychic ops like that were being explored by the US military, quite independently of Uri Geller, in their own continuing quest to militarize the paranormal. Centered at Fort Meade, outside Washington, D.C., the 20-year top-secret project, codenamed Stargate, included training soldiers in extrasensory perception, things like remote viewing, and psychokinesis, things like spoon bending, and more. One of the driving forces behind the now declassified Stargate program was an Army colonel called John Alexander. Alexander, though now officially retired from the Army, continues to be a central figure in developing experimental alternative forms of warfare under the heading of non-lethal weaponry, which includes psychic operations. He lives in Las Vegas now.
You've pioneered the work in non-lethal weaponry. You've written a book on that.
From a military perspective, yes.
What is non-lethal?
The things that don't kill you.
What kind of things do?
Well, I run from the low-end things you know about, from rubber bullets, if you will, which aren't rubber, but pepper spray, to tasers, to the high-end strategic incapacitation. How do you eviscerate the infrastructure of a nation state?
In the abilities that you've encountered or investigated, do you think there are people who've got the ability to take down a radar system?
One of the original questions that was asked when we were doing teaching people metal bending and all that, and they would come out with a impractical, what are you going to do, bend tank barrels? And my response was no. I says, I think what we're going to go after are computers. I don't need to take them down. All you have to do is make them unreliable, because everything we have is based on computer models and applications. So if you get to where you don't trust those computers, and basically everything we run now is digital information, that would be really significant. One of the things, again, when we say, well, what can you do with psychokinesis, for instance, attacking computers.
Do you know of any operations that Uri took?
Not operational, no.
Would you you Uri in as a consultant?
Oh, I'd love to, but remember, I don't run the Army anymore.
You see, we're talking, Vikram, you were talking about, what, 1973, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1970. Those were the years, the hot years. Yeah, and then there are things that I cannot talk about. I can't.
By now, Uri had a powerful new friend, Senator Claiborne Pell, head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Pell had a senior aide, a much-decorated Navy pilot, Scott Jones.
Urey and Claiborne were buddies, you know.
How did that happen?
Well, yeah, he volunteered his service to Claiborne. And Claiborne, of course, was always looking for a good psychic, and he knew he had a good one in Urey. And so they became friends, and I don't know how, every time Urey came to the United States, he would show up at the Senate. I mean, Pell would invite him.
Did you ever see him bend a spoon?
Yes, indeed. Pell called me up one day, and he said, Scott, Urey's coming into Washington. I want you to host him. I said, sure, I'd be glad to. And I said, let's do it under very closed circumstances. And so Pell arranged for a secure space. There are a few of them on the Hill that are double secure, so whatever happens inside cannot get out electronically. There's one of them in the rotunda of the Capitol.
Did you take him to Capitol Hill?
No, but I was there with Scott Jones. I think Scott and Senator Claiborne Pell were the ones that had invited him. And I was there with the commanding general of intelligence and the security command, and sitting in the front row and listening and watching.
And what happened?
Well, first of all, Urey was not there to bend metal or to do mental tricks. He was there to discuss the plight of Soviet Jews, which was really his interest. The people present were congressmen, a few senators, mostly staffers. We actually were in what's called a skiff, a special place that I didn't even know existed in the Capitol itself. And he talked, and what happened was people said, bend something, you know. And he said, okay, but I don't have anything.
I knew what they would have in the way of hardware. It would be the silver plate for the Senate. And the guy that was running it, I invited him in, who ran the space. And he brought in a bunch of silverware and put it out. And so Urey told him, said, leave the knives alone, you're not ready for that, but spoons and forks will be fine.
Well, what actually happened, and this is the actual spoon, and he was holding it thusly, and importantly, he came down from the top, not like this, because most of the ways you fake it is when you have control of the neck. That did not happen. He came like this, very light, and this was bending upwards, which you can imagine if any force you would expect to go down. And then he placed it on the back of a chair right next to him, and he went on talking because he was not interested in bending. He was interested in, again, talking about, this was the bad old days, you know, Soviet Union still in place, they're trying to immigrate to Israel. That was the focus. It continued to bend for a bit, or certainly appeared to, fell on the floor and ended up in my pocket.
But was spoon bending and the plight of Soviet Jews really what that day was all about? Urey thinks not.
There was another agenda behind that Capitol Hill shielded room from Russian eavesdropping. I think there was something else. It was a good way of introducing me to decision makers for later on projects.
Can you tell me any of those projects?
No.
Can you tell me anything you can't tell me?
I love that. Can you tell me anything you can't tell me?
Even with Senator Pell's strong backing, in 1995, the American Congress abruptly terminated its secret psychic programs, despite their many successes. And Scott Jones went home to rural Texas.
It ended because of a very senior science person at DIA who was also an evangelical, born-again Christian. And psychic phenomena is incompatible with their belief structure.
I can't imagine that the military or the intelligence community would ever fully shut down something that might enable them to gather intelligence better. Is that right?
let me not comment. But I think your logic is very powerful.
So you know something you don't want to tell me?
Perhaps, yes.
And so, in 1995, the government psychic program was disappeared without any obvious traces. Life in the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. ostensibly returned to normal. And maybe Uri Geller went deep black too, because from now on till 2001, there's no trace of his spycraft, though unconfirmed rumors have come in from Korea about Uri looking for hidden North Korean tunnels, and from Operation Desert Storm about Uri looking for mobile Iraqi Scud missile launchers, and from Iraq helping pinpoint their secret nuclear reactor for the Israeli Air Force to strike.
Has he ever talked to you about any of these things?
He has not. Well, I've heard those stories.
And
Are
those stories, with or without Uri involved, are those examples of applications that the kind of abilities that you've investigated?
Absolutely. When you say that he found the reactor in Iraq, is totally believable. It's the kind of thing that we had a program running, as you know, for 23 years. And what supported us, particularly at our last decade, was entirely operational things of that type.
And then came September 11th, 2001.
When that horrendous, tragic attack came on the 11th of September, I was actually a day before that in New York with Michael Jackson. All the remote viewers, I believe, were reactivated because America needed information fast.
You've said that after 9/11, you got a call from someone called Ron. Tell me that story.
The only thing that I can tell you is that I was reactivated by a person called Ron. I can't tell you what nationality and what country.
Is that because you don't know, or because you can't tell?
Because I can't tell. Of course I know.
And what does reactivated mean?
Well, you know that, for instance, in the spy business, there are sleepers, as you know, sitting in Moscow or in London, sleeping for 7, 8 years, and then they're reactivated. Go to work. We need this information.
And you got a call.
And I got a call, but so did probably another 150 people, and probably in a few countries.
Is it true that the people who took part in the Fort Meade program were reactivated after 9/11?
They may have been reactivated on a piecemeal effort. That I have heard that some of them had been called in to be helpful.
I mean, right after 9/11, there was a lot of recontact of remote viewers. And some of them were talking about this at remote viewing conferences. In fact, I was a voice, actually, to try to talk people out of doing that. Because after all, if there are terrorist cells in the U.S., you don't want them hunting down remote viewers as targets.
Something that I've seen around your house is you have an awful lot of security. Can you talk about that?
This place is incredibly well secured. There are, yes, indeed, dozens of cameras running, filming all the time, and there are indeed numerous people watching us 24 hours a day.
Why so much security?
Maybe it's because of that, again, the James Bondy twist in me, but just me knowing that it's covered, because that's what I've been taught, to make sure you cover everything. That gives me a feeling of security.
Yeah, if I was in the PLO or Al-Qaeda, I would think Uri Geller would be a great target.
You just said it. Why not? Uri Geller is famous, and this is why, you see, the camouflage for me is that outer inbuilt safety device is, hey, I am an entertainer. What do you want from me? I'm a showman. I'm in show business. Think of that. But there is that other side to Uri Geller. And I love that side as much as I love the totally open show business side of Uri Geller. And that side is the dark side. It's what you see in spy movies. You know what? In a very strange way, Vikram, I love the mystery around it. It's my persona. It's what made Uri Geller. So, not just stopping, just a step before the truth and the revelation and the true knowledge of what I really did, that's Uri Geller. That was my life. So I will always make sure that the final truth is never known.
Final truth or not, what about the science underlying all this? Our understanding of things like quantum entanglement has come a long way since the 1970s.
From a theoretical perspective, in terms of neurophysiology and electrophysiology and neurology, I could explain that whole thing. It would take me an hour to do it because I'm not facile enough at being able to do it in a couple sentences. But I can explain to you how synchronistically quantum entanglement in the brain works. And I believe that one can construct a very coherent theoretical explanation for these things.
Truth of the matter is, it used to be that science fiction was way out ahead of physics, but lately physics has exploded so much into so many different new directions that real physics is actually beginning to outstrip science fiction.
Are you doing classified work now?
Right now, I'm not.
Would you tell me if you were?
If it were really black, no.
But you do continue to do something for somebody, don't you?
No, I don't.
Are you sure? Not that you could tell me, but how could... Given the threats facing Israel, given the difficulty of getting good intelligence from some of the most dangerous places in the world right now, not just for Israel in an existential way, but for the larger concept of sort of Western democracies in America and Northern Europe and stuff, why would they not be asking you to help?
I don't want to go there, Vikram. Let's not go there.